CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman is live outside of the Supreme Court and joins me now to talk about it. Katrina, all right, here's where we're looking. Catch us up. What have we learned so far?
Hi, Vlad. Well, first of all, I'm out in front of the Supreme Court, and there is a long line of people here who are waiting to get into these arguments. This is such a big case that it's really drawing a crowd. But so far, there has been a lot of pushback. John Sauer is arguing on behalf of the Trump administration right now, and he's arguing to a court of originalists, of textualists, of people who rely on statutory interpretation. And Vlad, they keep asking him about the way he's trying to use the language here to regulate importation. Justice Amy Coney Barrett was pushing back a lot on him. She said, can you point to any place in the statutory code, in the history, where it was used to confer tariff authority? And she is someone who really, really is strong on statutory interpretation, Vlad. Another one of the justices just said that to have the president's power trump congressional power when it comes to taxation seems to neutralize those powers. So this is really a really key case about the balance of power. John Sauer has been arguing that the president has broad authority when it comes to foreign affairs, that he has the inherent power to regulate foreign commerce. He also said that these are regulatory tariffs. He said they're not revenue-raising tariffs. He said that that creates a distinction here, Vlad. So there's been a lot of pushback. They're also talking about the major questions doctrine quite a bit.
Okay, so let me tell you what just happened, because this is absolutely insane. The Supreme Court just delivered what might be the biggest legal blow to Donald Trump in years. And I'm talking about a move so brutal that it sent shockwaves through MAGA headquarters. We're talking reports of total meltdown mode, people scrambling, the whole operation thrown into chaos. And here's the kicker. The Supreme Court didn't even bother writing a long opinion about it. They just said no, denied, done, move on. Now you might be thinking, wait, isn't the Supreme Court supposed to be Trump's safety net? I mean, come on. He appointed 3 of those justices himself. But here's what nobody's talking about. This wasn't just any denial. This was the Supreme Court slamming the door on Trump's entire legal strategy, the strategy he's used for years to avoid consequences, the delay game, the endless appeals, the emergency requests that magically buy him more time. All of that, yeah, it just got absolutely demolished. And the timing could not be worse for Trump. We're talking about a guy who's currently sitting in the White House, dealing with political pressure from every direction, and now he's got to face federal criminal proceedings without any more escape hatches. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Which says you can't make rules on issues of vast economic or political significance unless Congress has specifically conferred that power. And then Sauer has also been hearkening back to a case related to Nixon. It was an earlier version of the law that IEPA now is, and Nixon had used that to invoke his ability to tax. And so the Trump administration is relying on that quite a bit, but the justices are really pushing back here.
Yeah, and so Katrina, may the president's own words come back to torpedo this, because the president himself has never framed the tariffs as regulatory in nation. The president has always framed the tariffs as revenue generating. In fact, he talked about it yesterday, where he says the tariffs are great for the United States and bringing in a lot of money to the United States. So I wonder if that has been sort of reflected back to Mr. Sauer. And then the other question, of course, becomes Congress's ability to regulate interstate and international commerce. Is the court, from what you're listening to, siding on the notion that you will erode more of Congress's authority and give that to the president?
Absolutely. There seems to be deep concern here about just giving that authority over to the executive branch when Congress has not specifically made that clear. That's this whole issue of the major questions doctrine, the pushback we're hearing about how this could potentially just neutralize the balance of powers between the executive branch and the legislative branch, Vlad. And to what you were saying, I was thinking the exact same thing.
But here's where it gets even wilder. Trump himself went on True Social because of course he did, and posted something that shows you exactly how desperate things have gotten. He wrote that tomorrow's United States Supreme Court case is literally life or death for our country. Life or death, tomorrow's United States Supreme Court case is literally life or death for our country. Life or death, those are his words, not mine. This is a man who's watching his legal protection crumble in real time, and he knows it. So what does this actually mean? Well, buckle up, because the next few months are going to be absolutely insane. We're talking about a sitting president who might have to stand trial as a criminal defendant. Yeah, you heard that right. Criminal defendant in federal court while running the country. Can you believe this? This is unprecedented territory. We've never seen anything like this in American history. And the political fallout? It's already starting. Republican leaders are reportedly in emergency meetings trying to figure out what this means for their agenda. Trump's allies in Congress are scrambling to spin this. The conservative media ecosystem is melting down, trying to explain how the Supreme Court, including Trump's own appointees, could do this to him. Here's what makes this even more fascinating. The Supreme Court didn't split on this decision. There was no dissent, not even from the justices Trump put on the bench. That tells you something huge is happening here. When even your own appointees won't save you, when there's no lengthy opinion explaining their reasoning, when it's just a flat-out denial with no room for argument, that's a message, a loud one. And Trump's opponents, they're having a field day. Social media is exploding with reactions. Legal experts are calling this a watershed moment. Democrats are basically saying, this proves nobody is above the law, not even a president. The narrative battle over this is going to dominate the news cycle for weeks. But here's what you need to understand. This isn't just about Trump facing consequences. This is about the entire legal framework that's protected powerful people for decades. The Supreme Court just set a precedent that could change everything about how we handle presidential accountability. So, what happens next? Well, that's the billion-dollar question. Trump's legal team is out of moves. There's no appeal from a Supreme Court denial. This is it, the end of the line. And that means we're about to enter completely uncharted territory in American politics. A sitting president facing federal criminal proceedings with no way to stop them. Think about that for a second. Let that sink in. The legal world is stunned right now. Lawyers who've been following Trump's cases for years are saying they've never seen anything like this. The speed of the denial, the lack of any dissenting opinion, the united front from the entire court. It's all pointing to something massive. This isn't business as usual. This is the Supreme Court making a statement about presidential power and legal accountability that's going to echo for decades. And you know what's really crazy? Trump's own words on Truth Social reveal just how much panic is setting in. When he's using phrases like life or death, when he's framing this as an existential crisis for the entire country, that's not confidence, that's desperation. All right, so let's talk about why this Supreme Court decision is such a massive deal and why most people are completely missing the real story here. Because yeah, everyone's talking about Trump losing at the Supreme Court, but the actual implications of this, way bigger than anyone's reporting. First, you gotta understand Trump's legal playbook. For years, like literally years, his entire strategy has been delay, file an appeal, request an emergency stay, push the trial date back, tie things up in procedural knots. It's worked for him over and over again. Every time he's faced legal trouble, his lawyers find some way to push things down the road. And why does that work? Because in the American legal system, the longer you can drag things out, the better your chances of something happening that saves you. Witnesses forget details. Public attention moves on. Political circumstances change. Time is Trump's best friend in court. But here's what just changed everything. The Supreme Court basically said, we see what you're doing, and we're not playing along anymore. And when I say they denied his emergency application, I don't mean they thought about it and wrote a careful opinion explaining their reasoning. Nope, they just said denied. No explanation, no dissent, nothing. That's actually really significant because usually when the Supreme Court handles a major case, especially one involving a president, they write these long, detailed opinions. They explain their thinking. They address counter-arguments. But this time, radio silence except for one word, denied. Now think about what that means. Trump appointed 3 of these justices, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Barrett. These are people who owe their seats on the highest court in the land to Donald Trump, and not one of them, not a single one, stepped up to help him out. There was no dissent from the conservative wing, no indication that anyone on that court thought Trump deserved more time or consideration. That's absolutely brutal for Trump's team to process right now, and according to multiple reports, the reaction inside MAGA headquarters was exactly what you'd expect. Total chaos, people yelling, emergency calls, the whole operation thrown into panic mode because suddenly all their carefully laid plans just got destroyed. They were counting on delays, they were counting on more time to prepare, they were counting on dragging things out until political circumstances improved, and the Supreme Court just said, nope, not happening. But here's where it gets really interesting. Trump's True Social post revealed just how desperate things have gotten. He's calling this life or death for the country. Life or death? Come on. That's the language of someone who knows he's cornered. That's not confidence. That's panic dressed up as patriotic concern. And his supporters are eating it up, spinning this as some kind of political persecution. But let's be real here. The Supreme Court isn't exactly known as a bastion of anti-Trump sentiment. 3 of his own appointees are sitting on that bench. So what's really happening here? Well, the Supreme Court is setting a precedent that nobody, not even a sitting president, can use emergency appeals to indefinitely delay criminal proceedings. That might not sound dramatic, but in the world of presidential power and legal accountability, that's absolutely massive. Because up until now, presidents have enjoyed this kind of unofficial immunity through delay tactics. Sure, technically they can be charged with crimes, but practically speaking, they could always find ways to push things off. Not anymore. And this ties into something way bigger that people aren't talking about. The Supreme Court is clearly drawing a line about how far presidential power extends when it comes to avoiding legal consequences. They're saying, we're not going to be your escape hatch anymore. We're not going to rubber stamp endless delays just because you're powerful. And that has huge implications, not just for Trump, but for every president who comes after him. Now let's talk about the political impact, because this is where things get absolutely wild. Trump is sitting in the White House right now, dealing with international crises, domestic policy fights, all the normal presidential stuff. And now he's got to simultaneously prepare for federal criminal proceedings. Can you imagine the logistics of that? The security concerns, the constitutional questions, and his opponents are sharpening their knives. Democrats are already using this to argue that Trump's presidency is compromised. They're saying, how can you run the country when you're preparing for criminal trial? How can we trust your judgment when you're facing potential prison time? It's brutal political ammunition, and they're going to use every bit of it. But here's what's really fascinating. Even some Republicans are reportedly uncomfortable with this situation, not because they think Trump did anything wrong, but because they recognize how bad this looks politically. They're worried about down-ballot races. They're worried about swing voters. They're worried that this story dominates everything and makes it impossible to talk about policy wins or legislative achievements. The conservative media is trying to spin this as proof of a corrupt legal system targeting Trump, but even they're struggling with the optics here. When your own Supreme Court appointees won't help you, when there's no dissent, when it's just a clean denial, that's really hard to frame as persecution. And then there's the international angle that nobody's talking about. Foreign leaders are watching this. They're seeing an American president dealing with criminal proceedings. They're wondering about stability. They're questioning whether America can still be a reliable partner on the world stage when its leader is fighting legal battles. That perception matters. It affects diplomacy. It affects negotiations. It affects everything from trade deals to military alliances. Trump's legal team is now completely out of options. There's no appeal from the Supreme Court. They can't file another emergency request. They can't delay anymore. This is it, the end of the road. And that means whatever they've been trying to avoid, whatever consequences they've been pushing down the line, it's all coming due now. So when you hear about meltdown mode inside MAGA headquarters, this is why. Because years of legal strategy just got obliterated in one Supreme Court decision. All those carefully constructed plans, all those delay tactics, all those emergency appeals, worthless, gone. This is what institutional pushback looks like. This is the legal system saying we're done accommodating endless delays from powerful people. And Trump, who spent his entire career using the courts to his advantage, who's mastered the art of legal delay, just ran headfirst into a wall that won't move. The Supreme Court, including his own appointees, just told him no in the most definitive way possible. And that changes everything about what comes next. Legal scholars are already writing papers about this moment. Constitutional experts are debating what it means for separation of powers. Political scientists are analyzing how this affects the balance between executive authority and judicial oversight. This isn't just a Trump story. This is a story about how American democracy functions when pushed to its absolute limits. The irony here is thick enough to cut with a knife. Trump spent years appointing judges he thought would protect him. He bragged about reshaping the federal judiciary. He celebrated every conservative appointment as a victory for his movement. And now, those same judges are the ones closing the door on his legal escape routes? Okay, so let's break down exactly what this means going forward, because the implications are absolutely massive. And I'm going to walk you through this in simple terms because the legal jargon around this stuff can get confusing real fast. Point 1. Trump now faces imminent federal criminal proceedings with zero ability to delay them further. That's the bottom line. The Supreme Court closed the door on his delay strategy, and there's no reopening it. So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, it means scheduling. It means court dates. It means Trump or his lawyers having to physically show up and deal with this stuff. And unlike civil cases where you can sometimes skip appearances, criminal proceedings are different. They require your presence. They demand your attention. This isn't something you can just delegate to your legal team and forget about. And think about the practical reality here. Trump's got presidential duties. He's got meetings with foreign leaders. He's got policy decisions to make. He's got a whole country to run. Now add criminal proceedings to that schedule. How does that even work? The logistics alone are mind-boggling. You've got security protocols for a sitting president. You've got classified information concerns. You've got the dignity of the office to consider. But you also have the legal requirement that defendants appear in court. How do you balance those competing interests? Nobody knows. There's no playbook for this. We're literally making it up as we go. And that uncertainty creates massive problems for everyone involved. The courts have to figure out how to handle a defendant who happens to be the most powerful person in the country. The Secret Service has to protect someone who's legally required to be in potentially vulnerable situations. The prosecutors have to navigate political landmines while still doing their jobs. And Trump's legal team has to coordinate all of this while knowing that every single move they make is going to be scrutinized by millions of people. The pressure on everyone involved in this case is going to be absolutely insane. Point 2. This sets a huge precedent about presidential accountability that goes way beyond Trump. Because here's what the Supreme Court just established. Being president doesn't give you unlimited power to delay legal consequences. The emergency appeal route, the strategy that powerful people have used forever to avoid justice, that's done. The court basically said, we're closing that loophole. And that's going to affect every president who comes after Trump, regardless of party. Future presidents now know that if they face criminal charges, they can't just appeal their way out of it forever. There's a limit. There's an endpoint. And the Supreme Court will enforce that endpoint. Now, some people are going to argue that's dangerous. They're going to say presidents need protection from politically motivated prosecutions. And look, there's some merit to that argument. But here's the thing. The Supreme Court isn't saying presidents can be charged with anything at any time. They're saying that if you are charged and the case proceeds through the system, there comes a point where we stop letting you delay indefinitely. This precedent is going to be cited in law books for generations. Legal scholars 50 years from now are going to study this moment. They're going to analyze what it means for executive power. They're going to debate whether the Supreme Court went too far or not far enough. This is the kind of decision that shapes constitutional law for decades. And Trump, whether he likes it or not, is now the case study for how the system handles presidential criminal liability. Every future discussion about presidential power, about executive immunity, about legal accountability for our highest office, it's all going to reference this moment. Trump's name is going to be in constitutional law textbooks forever, and not in the way he probably imagined when he first ran for office. He wanted to be remembered as a transformative president. Well, he's definitely going to be remembered, but probably not for the reasons he hoped. Point 3. The political fallout from this is going to dominate everything for months, because this story has legs. It's going to keep developing. Every court appearance, every motion filed, every development in the case, that's all going to be national news. Trump's opponents are going to use it as ammunition constantly. They're going to question his fitness for office. They're going to argue he's distracted. They're going to say his legal troubles compromise his ability to lead. And you know what? That's effective politically. It puts Republicans in a really tough spot because they have to either defend Trump against criminal charges or distance themselves and risk alienating his base. Neither option is great. Republican strategists are probably having nightmares right now. They've got to figure out how to navigate this minefield. Do they stand by Trump and risk looking like they're defending criminal behavior? Do they distance themselves and risk a civil war within the party? There are no good answers. In Trump's base, they're going to rally harder. They're going to see this as persecution. They're going to donate more money. They're going to show up to rallies. They're going to flood social media with support. Trump knows how to work the victim narrative, and this gives him perfect material. Every court appearance becomes a rallying cry. Every legal setback becomes proof of the deep state targeting him. It's going to energize his hardcore supporters in ways we haven't seen in years. But here's what changes the equation. This isn't theoretical anymore. This isn't some distant possibility. The Supreme Court just made this real, made it immediate, made it unavoidable, and that shifts the entire dynamic because now people have to actually process what it means to have a sitting president in criminal proceedings, not as a hypothetical, but as reality. And that's going to change polling. It's going to change public opinion. It's going to change how swing voters view this whole situation. Point 4. Trump's legal team is now in full crisis mode, trying to figure out their next move when there are no more moves left. Think about that position. You're a lawyer representing the president. Your entire strategy for years has been delay until circumstances improve. And suddenly, the Supreme Court eliminates delay as an option. What do? You can't appeal. You can't file for emergency relief. You can't push the trial date back. Your only option is to actually fight the case on its merits, which is what Trump's team has been trying to avoid this whole time. And that's going to force some really interesting decisions. Do they try to negotiate some kind of deal? Do they prepare for an aggressive defense at trial? Do they shift strategy entirely and try to win in the court of public opinion instead of the courtroom? These are questions they're probably screaming at each other about right now because there are no good answers. Every option has massive risks. The lawyers Trump has are some of the most expensive in the country. They're getting paid massive amounts of money to figure this out. And right now, they're probably sitting in conference rooms trying to explain to their client that there's nothing they can do, that the game is over, that all the money and all the legal expertise in the world can't change what the Supreme Court decided. Can you imagine that conversation? Trump doesn't like hearing no. He doesn't accept limitations. And now his own lawyers have to tell him the Supreme Court just imposed a limitation he can't fight. That's got to be one of the most uncomfortable conversations in legal history. The tension in those meetings must be absolutely brutal. And you know Trump's probably cycling through emotions, anger, denial, blame, desperation, trying to find someone or something to pin this on. The reaction on social media has been absolutely explosive. Trump supporters are losing their minds, saying this is proof of corruption. His opponents are celebrating, saying justice is finally coming. Legal experts are analyzing every angle. Political commentators are spinning it 50 different ways. And the truth is, nobody really knows what happens next because we've never been here before as a country. Here's what we do know, though. The Supreme Court, including justices Trump himself appointed, just told him no in the most definitive way possible. No lengthy opinion, no dissent, just denied. And that sends a message not just to Trump, but to everyone watching. The message is simple. There are limits. There are boundaries. And even if you're sitting in the Oval Office, those boundaries still apply. You don't get to delay forever. You don't get to use emergency appeals as an infinite escape hatch. Eventually, the system catches up. And for Trump, who spent decades mastering the art of legal delay, who's built an entire career on avoiding consequences through the court system, this is checkmate. This is the one move he can't counter. Because there's no appeal from the Supreme Court. There's no higher authority to run to. This is the end of the line. And whatever happens next, he's got to face it head on. No more delays, no more running. The bill has come due. The historical significance of this moment cannot be overstated. Future textbooks are going to have entire chapters about this. Students decades from now are going to study this case. Historians are going to debate what it meant for American democracy. And we're living through it right now. We're watching history happen in real time. That's both terrifying and fascinating. So yeah, the next few months are going to be absolutely wild. We're talking about uncharted territory in American politics. A sitting president facing federal criminal proceedings. A Supreme Court that just set a massive precedent about presidential accountability. And through it all, Trump's going to be right in the center, fighting the biggest legal battle of his life with no escape routes left. This is what accountability looks like when it finally catches up to power.